I built my business. I took it from an Etsy shop with a few hundred sales to a multi-million-dollar operation with a dozen employees in a few years. And one of the main tools that I used was TikTok. Now I am facing the possibility, and everyone is facing the possibility, that TikTok could be banned by the US government. This could destroy my business, but I don't think it's gonna happen, and here's why. A little bit about me. Like I said, built my business over the course of 4 or 5 years using social media. I built the majority of my business during law school, and I took my business full time instead of becoming a lawyer. So I kind of have this unique position where I am a small business owner who uses TikTok, and I also have a law background. My law background, I think, helps me remain a little bit calmer about it because I know exactly how this should play out. The ban itself was signed and it has a 9-month clock. And what that means is within 9 months, TikTok has to sell the American portion of TikTok, or the availability of TikTok in the US, to a company that's based in the US. And so what that could look like is TikTok forms a subsidiary in the US. They transfer American usage. I'm not super tech savvy about how this would work, but like the American operation of TikTok to that subsidiary. And then the subsidiary is wholly owned in the US. However, TikTok has control over it. The other thing is they would sell it to an American company or an American individual. It would certainly have to be a group of people because it's going to be so expensive if they try and sell it. It would literally probably be like over $1 billion. It's looking like there isn't really going to be a buyer that TikTok would be okay with, especially because all the chatter and news surrounding this has indicated that ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, thinks that their algorithm is their secret sauce, and it's what makes TikTok like a really valuable platform and makes it really good to use. And so they wouldn't want to give that information, that like trade secret or potential intellectual property of a different kind, to someone else. If there's somebody who's interested in purchasing the platform, but the sale can't go through within 9 months, there's the possibility to extend the deadline by 3 months. And that's just something the president could do. And so it could be like a full year if there's a promising buyer. So it's a 9-month to a year timeline before the app would be banned if it doesn't get sold. Let's talk about when that clock runs out. I think that that clock is going to get stopped pretty soon if it's already running. And that's because there's going to be lawsuits, like I mentioned. ByteDance is certainly suing. I don't know if they filed yet, but they will. And then I think the ACLU, maybe some other First Amendment activist groups might also try to sue. Obviously, they would need to find somebody to sue on behalf of. But they'd be bringing up First Amendment claims. So I want to talk about that. I was super interested in the First Amendment when I was in law school, so I know a pretty good chunk about that. It's a little rusty because it's been a few years, but that's kind of at the center of the TikTok ban. So if you're not familiar, the First Amendment in the US Constitution says that the government cannot ban, inhibit, basically censor free speech. Essentially, that means, very strictly speaking, that there can't be any government action that stops someone from speaking, writing, making themselves heard, etc. This is something that is extremely litigated. There have been so many lawsuits in American history about what constitutes speech, what the government can and cannot ban, where the government can ban speech, where they can't ban speech. And a lot of these cases become very famous, and this is like a very interesting area for a lot of lawyers. So basically how this would work in this case: TikTok would sue the government saying that you are violating our First Amendment rights by having the platform be banned in the US, and therefore we can't speak on it and no one else can use the platform to speak. And the like major case that's applicable in this situation is called New York Times versus United States. And this is the Pentagon Papers case, which is where the Pentagon Papers were leaked to the New York Times by people in the Defense Department. And it was concerning basically like operations that were carried out during the Vietnam War. So this was back in the 70s. In this case, the US government, the federal government, was suing to stop the New York Times from publishing any of those papers that would reveal the Vietnam War operations. And they said that that posed a national security risk. So they're claiming a national security risk. The New York Times, on the other hand, is obviously claiming a free speech, free press claim. And so they're saying, like, we have to be able to publish this because we have First Amendment rights to free speech, free press. And the court, the Supreme Court, took up the case and was weighing those two concerns against each other. Basically, they said that prior restraint, which is just total censorship before the speech, has a very high standard to meet for the Supreme Court to think, okay, the First Amendment will allow this. And that burden is based on inevitable, direct, and immediate safety risks. So basically, the government could get the New York Times to not publish papers that, if published, would pose to Americans an inevitable, so it's gonna happen, immediate and direct safety risk. That's really high and hard to prove. It would have to be something along the lines of, like, the US government is prohibiting the New York Times from publishing because if they do, then there will be like a nuclear bomb like immediately following that, or like there would be a terrorist attack, or there would be like this information would directly cause some sort of like tragedy, basically. TikTok is going to be arguing if you ban the platform entirely, this is a ton of prior restraint. It's prior restraint on 170 million users who are in the US. What the government would then have to prove is that there is an inevitable, immediate, direct safety risk. Okay, so they're claiming that inevitable, immediate, direct safety risk has to do with the fact that the Chinese government has access to the TikTok platform and has allegedly an ability to manipulate what is posted on TikTok or what is amplified on TikTok. And there is strong evidence to show that topics such as Tiananmen Square, Tibet, Taiwan, all of these issues that the Chinese government doesn't want anyone talking about, that makes them look bad or could make them look bad. There's evidence to show that on TikTok, those topics are spoken about or amplified substantially less than other social media platforms. And there's no real reason why they would be different on different platforms other than suppression. So there is that to suggest there is a real, sort of suppression happening on TikTok. However, there's not specific evidence that user data in the US is being abused by the Chinese government, which is really what is being claimed by the US government. And basically, they're just, because TikTok and its algorithm is a black box, it's gonna be really hard for the government to prove exactly how information or data that US users put into the app and then the Chinese government allegedly accesses. It's gonna be hard for the US government to prove exactly how that's being abused. And in that case I mentioned, New York Times versus United States, the Supreme Court has already said that there can't just be a vague threat to security, it needs to be concrete. And so I don't think that the government is going to be able to meet that standard, especially because they have to show that inevitable, immediate, and direct safety risk, which is a very high standard. So that's basically how this argument will work. I know that's pretty technical, but as someone who has seen a little bit of First Amendment cases in law school, I can tell you, like, there would need to be like some really strong bombshell evidence emerging on the government side to overcome that standard. They also could change the standard. I don't know what the Supreme Court is going to do. They don't necessarily have to follow precedent. Like, theoretically they have to, but the court could do what they want. So I really can't tell you for sure what's going to happen, but that is how things should go according to how the law usually works. Here's the thing that I am personally confused about. So there is a difference between a piece of speech and a platform where that speech is written, spoken, recorded, posted, etc. And in other parts of the law, the difference between a company or a service that is a platform versus a publisher is a major distinction. Essentially, just follow me on this. Platforms are different than publishers, and For example, a newspaper is considered a publisher, whereas a social media platform is considered a platform. And they enjoy different rights as far as the liability they incur when people consume the content on their respective services. So a publisher is liable for what they say, whereas a platform is not liable for what they say. So what I'm interested to see is whether or not a platform can sue saying that the First Amendment is implicated by a ban of their platform versus a publisher, which is what all these traditional cases are about, New York Times, newspapers, etc. And if the argument elsewhere in other realms of the law is that platforms aren't actually speaking, they're just providing a platform for other people to speak on, how can they sue for free speech infringement? That's why I'm curious to hear if there will be other lawsuits by plaintiffs who are actually on the platform, people who use TikTok, and saying that banning the platform inhibits them speaking, especially to their followers who they already have built up on that platform. And there have been other First Amendment cases that discuss restrictions about like where someone can speak. So for example, you can ban speech in a park if it's banned for everybody who could possibly speak in that park, and it's for a particular time that serves a particular purpose. They're called time, place, and manner restrictions. But I'm curious to see if that will come up at all with TikTok being a platform more akin to, theoretically, akin to a public park where people can speak versus the New York Times, which is a newspaper where speech is actually being spoken or being written or being read. That is more akin to somebody standing in a park and speaking. So those types of speech are protected differently. And so I'm really interested to see how that will play out and whether a lawsuit brought by, for example, ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, is different from a lawsuit brought by somebody who uses the platform to actually speak. So what would a world without TikTok look like? Let's say they lose the lawsuit, TikTok can't find someone to sell to or decide not to sell, and TikTok is banned. So first of all, there is that 9-month clock. So TikTok wouldn't be banned even after a lawsuit for 9 months, but a lawsuit will have to take at least, I have to believe, a year, because they'll file the lawsuit, they'll get assigned a judge, it'll go through district court, there will be some sort of appeal. The appeals process is going to take a long time. It'll have to go up to the circuit court. Then I'm sure the Supreme Court is going to take this up. They take several months to come out with a decision. Then whatever their decision is, it needs to be applied. So it would go back down to the district court. Again, this process is going to take a long time. There's no way TikTok, I think, will be banned before, let's say, like 2026, potentially like January of 2026. So we have TikTok the same way that we do today. We will have it for at least 1 year and 9 months, in my opinion. Could be longer, maybe a little bit shorter. Then let's say TikTok actually does get banned. And what's going to happen is the government can't just take it off your phone. It's not possible. What would happen is the government would ban TikTok from the Google Play and the Apple App Store. And so then you could still use TikTok until the app is so out of date, it's not really compatible with the servers and how TikTok is actually put out to the app anymore. So that process probably takes a whole nother year. That means that TikTok definitely should be working on our phones in its normal form for at least 3 years from now. Let's say you can't use it anymore. Okay, the ban finally takes effect. What does the world look like? Well, TikTok would probably still be very likely accessible through a VPN. Let's say you can't access it at all. The people who use TikTok are not going to stop consuming content like TikTok. What they're going to do is they're going to watch Instagram Reels and they're going to watch YouTube Shorts that are very much like TikTok. They're trying to become more and more like TikTok every single day. And so that's going to be the new TikTok, basically. People are not going to stop. There's going to be a vacuum of attention that people normally dedicated to TikTok. And what's going to fill that vacuum is those two existing copycat apps, basically. Then there's also the possibility, and I'm sure somebody is going to try and do this, some company, to make a new form of TikTok They'd have to start from scratch, and that's always super hard with a social media platform. But the perfect time to do it is when there is a bunch of people who used to use an app and no longer can. So that's when I would expect a tech company like Microsoft, maybe someone else, to try and come out with their own social media platform that is just like TikTok. Again, all of this would suck. I'd probably shed some tears. It would be very frustrating. It feels like a lot of hard work would be down the drain. But I'm hopeful that it, first of all, maybe won't happen. And I'm also hopeful because, second of all, I have a lot of time to prepare for it. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this calmed some nerves for other small business owners who rely on TikTok. And I hope you found this interesting. I apologize for going so into the weeds with the legal stuff, but I hope it was clear. If you have any other comments about a possible TikTok ban or just how I grew my business on social media, please leave them below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel for more small business content.